Hamilton is probably the single most significant piece of theater to come about in the contemporary age. It is obviously a smash hit in the States, and it's doing quite well overseas as it expands. It's hard to really quantify this as the work of a single author, but we have Lin-Manuel Miranda, who is the writer and obviously the prime mover behind its production. The production has had a notable other voices who deserve credit. He works with a very strong production team. His choreographer, his director, his musical guy, and the cast. The original cast is just phenomenal in what they in what they were able to contribute and bring to the show, which by all evidence is still with them. When the original cast retires, they leave a mark, let's say. So, given that, there are multiple voices available within this production, and yet we have, the writer, the author that we can deal with, and that is Lin-Manuel Miranda, and justifiably so. It's his name on it. You got to give it to him. And the show is phenomenal. It is a remarkable piece of theater. It is. You can call it an opera. You can call it an operetta. It's obviously drawing from Gilbert and Sullivan at certain points. It name checks, notably, it name checks Shakespeare at a couple of points. Most notably, Macbeth, when this very ambitious man is being goaded to do something by the female voices in his world. I thought that was a very cheeky little touch. And he is also working very much within the Broadway tradition. Lin-Manuel Miranda is not a necessarily radical guy. He's a showbiz guy, and he's out there doing the best Broadway that he can. And because of this, because you get this confluence, there is so much to deal with. Probably one of the most conspicuous aspects of the show, on first glance, has nothing to do with the script, but rather with the casting. So-called race-blind casting, putting black and brown faces on these ossified names of the founding fathers, is a dynamic marketing stroke, to say the least. But it's more. It creates a new layer of meaning. With many of these familiar characters estranged from their customary identities. The George Washington being played by a black man, Thomas Jefferson being played by a black man. This is odd, let's say. It is satirical to have these slave-holding dead white men played by people who might have been their slaves, if they had lived at the same time, but it also cuts both ways, because having the identity shared, where it becomes sort of irrelevant, is significant to watch, but also from an experiential point of view, it invites in everybody who has been perhaps excluded or felt excluded from that identification with these founding fathers, people who maybe feel like a racial barrier denying them access to partake in that dream. This sort of strips that away and say, well, okay, well, what if we just, imagine it this way? And it invites a new group in and say, well, okay, from that perspective, maybe he was just trying to do his best. Maybe he wasn't just, this two-dimensional caricature. Maybe it's more complicated than that. This gives an opportunity to stitch together some of the divides that have just slashed this country from its founding. This is all further augmented by the music, obviously, probably its second most notable surface characteristic. Hamilton's been called a hip-hop opera, and it is, but it's so much more than that. As I said, it's got classic Broadway roots. It deals with rap, it has jazz, it has ragtime, R&B, Gilbert and Sullivan. All of these give it a kind of polyphonic, pluralistic harmony of very disparate voices that all somehow fit together. It's not a difficult metaphor to grasp. Within that, however, he's bringing even more to it. He's not just dealing with the stage, he's dealing with cinematic effects. You get slow motion, you get rewind, you get freeze frame. These are all brought into the staging. The show draws influence from this more culturally ubiquitous and probably influential realm of film and weaves it into the stage production. It's like one more little element that Miranda and the stage and the group, the crew, are just saying, it's okay, yeah, bring it in, something more. Let's see what we can do with this. It's got a very improvisational but extraordinarily polished feel to it. More. This is clearly the theme, bursting open the theme beyond the traditional, to hear the full chorus of disparate, divergent, and evolving American identities. This is furthered by multiple perspectives. You get a remarkable number of secondary characters having major numbers, musical numbers built around them. Eliza and Angelica, who conventionally would probably be, if we're going to do something about Alexander Hamilton and his battles with George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr and all of this stuff, it's all very male-centric. But he makes room for these female voices. He doesn't exclude that. He says, okay, no, bring it in. And he gives them just show-stopping numbers that are not particularly short or in any way curtailed, but in fact take up, like you get Eliza singing Helpless, a great song, and then that is answered, followed almost immediately by Angelica's song Satisfied, which is another showstopper, but it's one that if I were producing this, if I was the guy writing the checks and thinking, well, okay, this show is reaching almost 3 hours long, we can hack a good half an hour out of it. You get Angelica, you get Eliza, you get not particularly plot advancing numbers by Burr singing a lovely little lullaby, another kind of musical voice, a lovely lullaby to his daughter. And why? I mean, he's a good bad guy. Let's just hate him. No, you can't. It's always about looking for that other perspective on the character. Miranda's too good of an artist to just say, well, no, we're not going to go with a cookie-cutter bad guy. Lafayette gets another showstopper, but, you know, okay, great. He's a character. We all know the name, Lafayette. Great. Nobody really knows him that well in America. He's just a name. Why have it? Because it is one more voice, and it lets him plumb that other line that he really likes of immigration. Immigration is clearly a popular theme, and when you have Lafayette and Hamilton say, you know, immigrants, we get the job done, that is a pointed political message that he's driving right there, which has immediate resonance for the time that the show came about in the early days of the 2016 election cycle. But also just a vision of America that is completely consonant with the rest of the show in terms of pluralism. More. That is the message to immigrants from Hamilton as a show. More. We want it. We want to hear all these voices, and we will weave it together. You get a lot of the weaving coming in the musical form of refrains, characters repeating. They'll have a big number where there's like one particular line, and then that line will show up again later on in another character's song, and it's a sign that, okay, yeah, that's not just forgotten now, that's still an element. And by the end of the show, we're hearing line after line after line, which is callbacks to the earlier part of the show. because there is a kind of timelessness about the show, and that is another aspect of it, where they are weaving the past and the present, and it's no longer just the eternal present. They're saying, okay, no, let's consider the past, let's consider the past, let's reconsider the past in a new context, which is America. The second act is largely about choices. Jefferson rises as an antagonist and establishes the choice between two alternative visions of government. This is most accurately captured, or acutely captured, in the great fun number, the Cabinet Battle, one of two. The turn of the character Burr after the room where it happens, when he decides to take a more deliberate, goal-oriented approach and explicit pursuit of his goals. It's where he starts to turn bad, you could say. He chooses to do that. Before that, he was a good friend to Hamilton, and you get the sense that, well, they could still be friends if they just made certain different choices. Hamilton makes his own bad choices. With the Maria Reynolds affair, clearly a series of bad choices there. From the engaging of the affair to the payment of the husband and the boldness of continuing it, to the the insouciant his insouciant reaction to being confronted about it, his bold admission of it, and then his public admission of it, writing it in the paper, and is a move that still confounds historians to this day. Philip, his son Philip's duel with George Eaker is presented as an event in which he had no choice. He very explicitly says that line, "I had no choice." Well, do you? Couldn't you just back out? Again, this has been written on by a number of different historians, and you can just go to town with that. There's a fair number on that. Joanne Freeman is probably the best scholar on that, to be honest, and the most fun. All of this kind of comes to a head in the election of 1800, when that musical number has the refrain, "If you had to choose," and you see Burr and you see Jefferson and you have to choose, and Hamilton steps up in the depths of his despair at the death of his son, and confronted with two personally offensive options for himself, he chooses to do the right thing. He chooses his country over his personal identity. He chooses to say, all right, I think this would be better for the country. And this is noble. This is what he's been sort of moving towards throughout. And this is his ultimate legacy to the nation in doing that, in throwing his support behind Jefferson and blocking Burr. He seals his own fate, apparently, in this telling of the story, and he demonstrates how we can rise above our own petty individual instincts to serve one another within a national context, within a kind of shared experiment as citizens or as human beings. It is about rejecting tribalist culture and rising above it. It's a vision of pluralism. It's a melting pot that's more stew than broth, because you can have all of those undissolved chunks that are still leaching flavor into the rest of it, but make it all the more rich. Hamilton is about it's about American history, it's about the American present, it's about the American future. It is radical and traditional, it's classical and postmodernist, it's edgy and conventional, it's everything the United States ultimately is, and it encourages us all simply to recognize that fact. It appeals to its audience to crack out of the self-limiting identities and choose to embrace one another and the other. In short, Hamilton like the Odyssey, the Divine Comedy, Shakespeare, Milton, Swift, Blake, Whitman, Proust, Joyce, so many have done, Hamilton makes the case for recognizing our shared humanity. That's what makes it a great work of world literature.